I believe the final clause, regarding the primary asset, is quite clear. Mrs. Stone, the entirety of the estate, including the ancestral residence, is bequeathed solely and irrevocably to Eleanor and Chloe Stone, as you were legally adopted late in life, at age 7, correct? The explicit terms of this ancient trust define family only as direct bloodline descendants. Your name, Anya, is regrettably not listed. The lawyer's voice, dry, precisely articulated, and utterly devoid of human emotion, clattered like cold ceramic across the walnut-paneled room. It sliced through the hushed, pregnant tension of the probate, reading like a heavy, gilded guillotine. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the quiet, heavy finality of the words, which merely confirmed what I had known with painful certainty my entire life. I was an outsider, a tolerated guest, a legal asterisk. My mother, Eleanor, offered me a brittle, tight-lipped smile of vindication, a look that managed to convey both pity for my loss and smug relief at her triumph. My sister, Chloe, adjusted the massive, borrowed diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, and then adjusted her expensive silk scarf, her expression a perfect portrait of barely concealed, satisfied triumph. The immense mahogany desk where the documents rested suddenly felt like the uncrossable physical barrier between belonging and rejection. The entire scene was framed by the cold, late-afternoon light filtering through the stained glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a visual metaphor for the fleeting nature of their shallow wealth. I felt a surge of freezing, metallic disbelief. Not that they had done this, but that they had formalized decades of calculated emotional exclusion into a single, brutal, undeniable legal fact. My name is Anya Stone. I'm 34 years old. My professional life is built entirely on precision, cold logic, and empirical data. I run a boutique consultancy, Veritas Analytics, specializing in ethical, large-scale proptech, property investment, and asset valuation for institutional clients globally. I work remotely, managing my vast portfolio from a modest but meticulously efficient townhouse in Denver, Colorado. My professional income is exceptionally high, primarily derived from successfully acquiring and restructuring undervalued assets and licensing my proprietary valuation models, landing squarely in the $250,000 range annually, but my true net worth is far higher. But because I chose a life based on privacy, fiscal responsibility, and true sustainability over my family's relentless, desperate pursuit of social status, I have always been the family's greatest disappointment, consistently labeled the cold one, the logical machine, the one who never fit the Stone aesthetic. I was the child they bought, but never truly owned. While my younger sister Chloe, 29, the golden child, was perpetually paraded around as the successful museum curator, a hollow, parent-subsidized title that mostly meant hosting expensive, parent-funded events and socializing, I was the quiet strategist. Chloe's life was a gleaming, fragile facade of borrowed capital, leased cars, and excessive spending, guaranteed by Robert's failing business. Mine was an ironclad, yet unassuming fortress of liquid capital and meticulous planning. The explicit exclusion from my Aunt Iris's trust, the only Stone who ever showed me unconditional love, was the family's ultimate final declaration. You are not family. You are disposable. The core insult, the very source of my humiliation and the family's sudden, grasping relief was the primary asset of the trust, the beautiful, sprawling ancestral lakeside cottage in upstate New York, the haven. This house held every single positive memory of my difficult childhood, spent with Aunt Iris. The total appraised value of the cottage and its land was exactly $1.2 million, a sum the family desperately needed. I had quietly offered Eleanor and Robert, my father, to buy the house at market price just to preserve Iris's memory, offering to use it as a retreat for the extended family. Eleanor, cutting me off mid-sentence during the funeral luncheon, her gaze fixed entirely on the antique diamond brooch Iris had quietly left me, the only item bequeathed to me directly, was chilling. Anya, darling, be sensible. That house is finally ours, our bloodline's asset. It's worth $1.2 million. We need to use that equity immediately to cover Robert's mounting business debts and to pay off the interest on Chloe's trust fund loan. You're being overly emotional. That house is for us, the Stone bloodline. not for an emotionally needy outsider who can't even maintain appearances. Robert, the financially controlling enabler, patted my arm with practiced, superficial compassion, his touch feeling like a suffocating weight. You wouldn't understand the financial stress, Anya. You're too small-scale focusing on your digital analysis. We need that $1.2 million in assets to secure a critical, immediate bridge loan and satisfy the Hawthorne Group's demands. It's a necessary sacrifice for the family's solvency. You're just going to have to accept that you aren't part of the core structure, the foundation of this family. His words, "You aren't part of the core structure," solidified the decades of exclusion. I stared at the lawyer's stiff folders, containing the papers that formalized my rejection, and felt the full, crushing weight of their transactional cruelty. Their laughter, later that night when they uncorked expensive champagne to celebrate the windfall, was the final sickening sound of the victim in me dying. This public exclusion wasn't an isolated incident. It was the climax of years of systemic financial and emotional abuse. I flashed back to my early 20s when I received a small, unsolicited inheritance from my biological grandmother, a simple cash gift of $30,000. Robert immediately persuaded me to invest it in a sure thing, his new, rapidly failing real estate venture, Stone Properties. He guaranteed a 20% return. I never saw the money again. And when I asked for repayment years later, he simply lectured. That money was necessary to keep the real family business afloat. Anya. It was a required fee for entry into the family structure. The abuse continued into my professional life. When I launched Veritas Analytics, Eleanor publicly introduced me as the family's quirky architect who dabbles in coding, never mentioning the massive corporate valuation work I was doing. They used my quiet financial stability as a constant ATM. One year, Chloe racked up $10,000 in debt on a corporate card for a lavish party she claimed was essential networking, and Robert demanded I quietly cover it to prevent social scandal. I did, because the thought of their public disgrace still felt, sickeningly, like a personal failure of my own making. Standing alone outside the lawyer's office, clutching the deed to Aunt Iris's brooch, the victim was finally, completely gone. The quiet, calculating strategist took her place. Something inside me finally snapped. I would not only secure Iris's physical legacy, the house, but I would dismantle the very structure of their exclusion, using the one thing they truly understood and valued: property and absolute financial control. What my family didn't know, what their status-obsessed minds, focused only on old money and social climbing, could never conceive of, thanks to their tunnel vision on visible consumption, was the true scale of my professional life. Veritas Analytics was not just a boutique firm. I was a key, anonymous partner in a massive private equity syndicate that specialized in acquiring distressed debt and high-value, undervalued luxury real estate assets globally. My net worth was not the paltry annual income they assumed. It was a vast, complex portfolio of real estate assets, tech stocks, and sovereign debt, yielding a net worth north of $15 million in highly liquid assets. I was not struggling. I was an economic predator operating under deep cover, and they had just given me the motive, the explicit permission, and the prime target. The plan was a work of structural beauty, leveraging Robert's overwhelming greed against the cottage they had stolen. First, the immediate threat, the $1.2 million cottage. As expected, Eleanor and Robert immediately moved to use the cottage as collateral to secure a bridge loan from a local bank, Meridian Trust. They needed $700,000 in cash immediately to service Robert's increasingly desperate debts at Stone Properties and satisfy an overdue tax lien. Using my syndicate's resources, I immediately funneled $1.5 million into a new holding company, True Kin Holdings. I then contacted Meridian Trust and, through a high-stakes aggressive negotiation, acquired the entire note on the cottage before the ink was fully dry on Robert's loan documents. The deal was airtight, transferring the debt to my anonymous holding company. I was now their primary lender, holding a callable $700,000 debt secured by the cottage, which was worth almost double that amount. The entire transaction was sealed with an ironclad NDA that penalized the bank for disclosure. Second, the contract trap. Robert's firm, Stone Properties, was on life support. I used Veritas Analytics' forensic valuation expertise to conduct a quiet, comprehensive audit of their firm's assets, confirming they were technically insolvent, held together only by the constant promise of new collateral, like Caroline's cottage. I found the final, fatal weak point: a massive unsecured $2 million commercial construction loan Robert owed to the Commonwealth Group, due in exactly 90 days. Robert had gambled the company's entire future on being able to sell the cottage and roll the funds into this loan before the maturity date. He was operating on an impossible timeline. The family's escalation in the months following the reading of the will was sickeningly predictable. They immediately moved into the cottage, treating it as their new trophy, constantly sending me passive-aggressive photos of their superficial, loud renovations. "The cottage is so charming, Anya," Chloe wrote, attaching a photo of a hideous velvet chaise lounge. "We painted the living room a lovely cream color, something you, with your cheap taste and rustic aesthetic, wouldn't have understood. It really ties the family together here in the Bloodline Sanctuary." Then came the inevitable financial shakedown. "Anya, we need you to temporarily invest $50,000 into Robert's firm," Eleanor demanded over lunch, completely unaware of the looming financial collapse. "It's a family emergency. We'll pay you back when the $1.2 million cottage sale goes through next year. Your immediate participation proves your loyalty to the family." I politely refused, directing them to communicate only through Mr. Chen, my lawyer, a move they ridiculed as parodying high finance and being overly dramatic. I was calm, secretly building my case, documenting their increasing financial desperation and their relentless attempts to control my assets. The final battle was approaching. The default date on their $700,000 Meridian Trust note, which was now my note. The confrontation was scheduled for a Monday morning, precisely 90 days after the trust was settled, the exact date the first major interest payment on the $700,000 Meridian Trust note, now my note, was due. I drove my quiet, unassuming sedan to the lakeside cottage and parked in the gravel driveway, the same driveway I had played on as a child, learning to skip stones with Aunt Iris. Robert and Eleanor met me on the porch, their faces tight with annoyance and the residual stress of running a fraudulent business. They were dressed in expensive resort wear, completely oblivious to the impending storm. "Anya, what a surprise," Eleanor said, her voice brittle with annoyance. "You can't just stop by unannounced. This is a private property now, for the family. We're having important financial discussions." "I'm not here unannounced, Eleanor. I believe you received a formal notice from True Kin Holdings last week regarding your overdue $700,000 payment," I said, pulling a crisp, red-tabbed legal folder from my bag. Robert scoffed, adjusting his collar. "We were just about to wire it. The bank is playing games. We're a few days late. We're the Stones. They can wait. We have the $1.2 million in equity, so the debt is perfectly secured. What's the big deal?" I smiled, a cold, genuine smile that held no forgiveness, only professional finality. "Let me tell you what actually happened. I think you've all missed a few details about who owns your debt and what the term family really means." I stood opposite them, allowing the sunlight to hit the documents I held. "You told me I wasn't family, Eleanor. You said the $1.2 million cottage was for the Stone bloodline, not for an outsider. You celebrated my exclusion." Fact with exact dollar amount. The $700,000 note you took out from Meridian Trust, using Aunt Caroline's cottage as collateral, is now in default. You missed the payment due this morning. That note contains an immediate call clause upon delinquency, regardless of the size of the collateral. The collateral is now forfeit. I looked directly at Robert, who was sweating slightly despite the cool morning air. Proof or quote, I hold the full, executed promissory note, purchased from Meridian Trust by True Kin Holdings. I am the lender. I am the bank. I am foreclosing on the note immediately. Your entire, legally defined family structure is built on debt that I now control, debt that you were too insolvent to service. I paused, letting the silence ring, allowing Robert's face to crumple as the reality set in. Final blow, consequence. You told me I wasn't family. You excluded me from the house and you stole $30,000 from me years ago. I am here as your new sole landlord. The eviction notice is effective immediately. You have until the end of the day to vacate the premises or KL, my security chief, will escort you off my property. Furthermore, Robert, the Commonwealth Group has been notified that the collateral for your $2 million loan is now under foreclosure, meaning your firm is now irrevocably insolvent. The porch erupted. Eleanor shrieked, clutching her diamond necklace and screaming about betrayal, throwing a cocktail napkin at me. Robert's face went a sickly white, as he realized the total collapse of his business and his home. Chloe, who had been watching from inside, rushed out, hysterical, calling me a vindictive monster who only cared about spreadsheets. My grandmother Rose, my true ally and Aunt Caroline's older sister, drove up discreetly at that moment, escorted by Mr. Chen. She calmly confirmed the decades of financial abuse and the finality of the foreclosure, silencing the neighbors who had gathered to watch the commotion. "She is the only one worthy of the bloodline's honesty," Rose stated clearly, validating me over her own son. The consequences were immediate. Within a month, Stone Properties was dissolved, unable to service the $2 million Commonwealth Group loan due to the lost collateral of the cottage. Robert and Eleanor were left with crippling debt and no primary residence. Chloe's social status evaporated instantly. Anya used the cottage not as a personal residence, but as the new headquarters for the Aunt Caroline Foundation, dedicated to supporting young women from marginalized communities entering sustainable architecture. 2 years later, I received a final, desperate letter from Eleanor and Robert, living in a small, rented apartment provided by Chloe's now bankrupt fiancé's family. "Anya, we have nothing. You are obligated to the family. Blood is blood, and you owe us caretaking." I looked at the beautiful lakeside cottage, now filled with the light of young, ethical architects. I owed them nothing. I owed myself peace. I pressed the letter into the shredder. The silence was the sound of the disinherited outsider who finally owned the house.